I used to be able to get. I did. I gave my shirt away to the winner, and he got 114. So none of us were very good. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Good to see you. Well, friends, here we are on a beautiful March evening, and we are in the book of Esther. So go ahead and hunt that up in your Bibles. I have a very ambitious goal today. 3. And I think we're going to do it, of 3 chapters. So, what's that? I didn't hear you. Goals are good, yeah. All right, so we are tonight going to be in chapter 4, and we've been summarizing each of these chapters pretty quickly. Chapter 1 is the big party that gets out of control, and ultimately Vashti, the queen, gets fired as a result. Chapter 2 kind of has 2 sections. Number 1, the king feeling bad that he fired his wife as queen, and then their plan to deal with it is let's have a beauty pageant to get a new queen. And then the second part of it was that whole assassination plot that fellow Mordecai was able to foil, and so we looked at that. And then last week with chapter 3 is this fellow Haman we're introduced to, really kind of the first time really he takes a role, and we have hissing, bad guy. So this guy Haman here, he's promoted, number 2 in the kingdom, he's the greatest, but one guy won't bow to him. And that's that fellow Mordecai. And man, that drives him nuts. You have 1,000 people bowing before him, second most powerful man in the kingdom, royal robes, all this kind of stuff. But one guy is enough, and it just drives him mad. And as we saw, let's see if I can find it relatively quickly. It says in verse 6 of chapter 3, but he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So he wants to kill this guy Mordecai. He's so mad at him, but that's not good enough. He disdained to lay hands just on Mordecai. He wants to kill, as it says, he sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai. And so obviously we have this problem now for the Jewish people. What are we going to do here? And that brings us now to chapter 4. Are you with me? All right. Now, when Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes and he put on sackcloth and ashes. And he went out into the midst of the city, and he cried out with a loud and a bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one was allowed to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And thus he went to the king's gate. He couldn't go beyond that. Now remember, or if you weren't here, I'll inform you, that this plan, we're going to kill all the Jews, it wasn't going to happen tomorrow. They picked the date. It seems like a superstition. They rolled the die to find the best date to do so. And so it was 11 months away. And so here is Mordecai now. He's out and about. Here he is a Jew, but he's not at risk of being killed immediately. That's going to take place in about a year. And so he's in, as it says there, the sackcloth and ashes and the torn clothes. All of that, those are marks of mourning, marks of prayer, marks of repentance. Now, in this case, he's not repenting for something he did. He's repenting for a decree that went forth. Like, this, the change of God, this is no good, and so on. And so he's there in this garb. He can only come up to the gate. The whole point was nobody comes into the king's presence and bums out the king. Now, what should happen if the king's walking on the wall or something? He looks out. He sees him like this. This could be bad. And so Esther here is going to be involved now. She becomes concerned here about this guy Mordecai, which we'll see in a moment here. But Mordecai knows that a law of Persian law, can't be changed. It's put out there, and even if the king changes his mind, remember he changed his mind about the queen, there's nothing he could do about it. And so here's the law: the Jews are going to be killed. And so Mordecai is mourning that whole process. And I wonder if, as part of the mourning, whose fault is this, quote unquote? Like, if you had to place blame on somebody for getting all the Jews killed, who might you put the blame on? Okay, Haman, of course. can you make a case it's Mordecai's fault? You kind of can. If you would have just bowed, all right, you could have crossed your fingers and it wouldn't have counted. But why didn't you just bow? Now we're all going to die. And Mordecai didn't bow because of his own personal integrity. And we don't know exactly what it was. If he's an Agagite, Jews don't bow to Agagites, or not that guy. Remember, some of it was like a worship thing. He's like, I'm not worshiping that guy, or I just don't like that guy. Whatever. Something internally motivated him to not take a knee, not to bow. And this is the thanks I get, God? I tried to stand up for you, and I tried to do the right thing, and now here we are, God. I have to imagine, if he's anything like you and I, some of those thoughts are going on inside of him. It doesn't pay, quote unquote, it doesn't pay to try and honor God. Look at the type of stuff that happens here. And so here he is. Maybe that's what's going on in his thinking. We don't know. It doesn't say exactly, but I could see it. And so in verse 3, it says, now in every province, wherever the king's command and his decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and many of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. And so the same response that Mordecai had to this decree all throughout the provinces. Remember, 127 provinces covering 3.2 million square miles of land from India to Ethiopia. Jews were scattered all about, and word is filtering out that on this day, in December, think of it that way, 11 months from now, the Jews are going to be destroyed. They're going to be exterminated, annihilated. All those terms apply to it here. And so no wonder all throughout the kingdom there was great mourning. Verse 4, now when Esther's young women and her eunuchs came and told her, the queen was deeply distressed. And so she sent garments to clothe Mordecai so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Here's the part where, if the king should just happen to come across this guy in this mournful state and he bums out his day, he could be in trouble for that. And so she sees this, or they see this, the young women, the eunuchs, they come, they tell her what? Your uncle's out there, wearing sackcloth and ashes. The decree, we don't know exactly, but as you keep reading, it seems there's a little bit of both of those. And so she gets involved, verse 5, then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs, who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. All right, now, you would think, doesn't she have CNN? Like, she doesn't know what's going on? She wasn't watching C-SPAN when they passed the bill or whatever? Probably not. Well, definitely not, all right? I'm sure they didn't have that, but she also probably lived in inner parts of the palace, and life was great for her, and so on and so forth. She may have been completely unaware of this. And they don't know that she's a Jew. No one's coming and telling her. They don't necessarily even know her relationship with Mordecai. So the average person's not coming and sharing this with her. But her friends know, her close friends, they come to her. They tell her, hey, Mordecai's out there. He's mourning. Why? Verse 6, Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries. What do we call that again? That's a bribe, right? For the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther and explain it to her and command her. Notice, command her. You're going to command a queen? Well, that's what he said. To go to the king, to beg his favor and plead with him on behalf of the people. So here it becomes evident Esther doesn't know about it. Hathach doesn't know about it. And so Mordecai makes him aware, here, take this flyer back with you and command her to go intercede on our behalf, on the behalf of the Jews. Verse 9, and Hathach went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai, and this guy's back and forth, and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. All right, so previously, we saw that one of the laws of the Medes and the Persians was that when they make a law, it can't be changed. Here we now learn a second law of the Medes and the Persians, and that is you can't go into the king's presence unless invited into the king's presence here. And there's quite a penalty if it turns out he doesn't want you there. But surely that doesn't apply to the queen, right? It does, actually. And you say, well, what kind of marriage relationship is that? Well, it was the Persian marriage. This whole thing is messed up, we saw here. So their marriages were a bit different than our marriages. And so she's not even allowed to go. And how long has it been since she's been there to see him? It's been a month, 30 days here. So verse 12, so they told Mordecai what Esther had said. That's verse 11, what they said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And that may be the most famous verse of this book, is 4:14 there. And so we see Mordecai here, strong words kind of, that he gives to, but again, she was like his daughter, and so sometimes stern words have to be given. And he reminds her that though she was kind of insulated from the information, it would eventually get to her. Not the information, but the penalty itself, like everybody else. She was a Jew. It would be discovered she was a Jew eventually, and it would hit her just like it's going to hit all the other Jews in the kingdom. But then notice what he does is he reminds her that one way or the other, God was going to preserve the Jewish people. All right, and then he says to her, and perhaps his plan is to use you as part of it. But he's absolutely confident that God's going to preserve his people. Now, a lot of people may die, but they're not going to be exterminated, and he's confident of that reality. What he's not confident about, but he's beginning to have his suspicions about, is that God might want to use Esther to protect his people here. And so, I really appreciated this about him. We see it later on. We can be very confident in some things about God, and then there are other things where we have to sort of move forward in, I don't know, here. And what I mean by that is, I know God's ultimate will, but I'm not sure how that's necessarily going to be worked out in life here. And that's okay. Sometimes I think I need to know exactly what God's going to do. You're not going to know exactly, so just settle in on that. All right? You know that he's good. You know that he's sovereign. You know that he's loving. You know that he's got your best interest at heart, all those kinds of things. You know that. You can walk in that reality. How that plays itself out, we don't. And so we walk by faith in those circumstances. And so he says to her, God's going to protect his people, and he might even use you to do it. Again, he says, deliverance will, if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. Notice his trust is not in Esther. His trust is in God. And I think that's very important. We don't put our trust in a man or in a woman. We put our trust ultimately in God. If a man or a woman lets us down, it's disappointing in all of that, but our trust is not in a man or a woman. Our trust is in God here. And he knew that God was going to allow his promises, he wasn't going to allow his covenants to the Jewish people to fail, even if Esther did, or anybody else did. All righty? So again, we have the deliverance and the uncertainty. Relief and deliverance will rise. And then notice at the end of 14, he says, and who knows? So deliverance and uncertainty, confidence and humility. I think it's pretty great. Thoughts on that? Have you discovered that in your life? Yeah? Anybody want to share anything about that? Or where you can be really confident even in an unknown? Okay, I got a lot of quick yeahs, but then nobody wants to share a little story? Ruth, what would you like to share?
So my son was on a submarine in the mission between the South China Sea with ballistic missiles on the USS Florida for 720 days.
Oh my gosh.
And it was pretty tough not knowing where he was. But I think the verse in Hebrews is Hebrews 19:6, something about anchor. I can't think of it now. But what you don't know is that he was a miracle in itself, and that I wasn't supposed to have any children, and I had him. And then after I conceived at 7 months pregnant, I was hit by a car, and nearly lost me and the baby, and so he's a miracle. He was born in Columbus Day, his name is Noah, and he's in a boat. So the entire time that I was praying for him, I did a Hannah prayer. It just basically said, I don't know where he is, but you do. And he's not mine. He's yours. So, yeah.
Was he underwater for 720 days?
No, they have 2 teams.
Okay.
With the mission, he had to calculate, he's got his father's brains, he had to calculate the implosion tendencies of the submarine to go through the Panama Canal. So, he's
I don't
out.
know what that means.
It was, so that if he goes at a certain depth in an old 42-year-old boat, it could have imploded.
Oh,
So
okay.
there's a lot of stress along with the fact that there was missiles and such.
Yeah. And so he is not in the Navy, or was it Navy?
Well, I'm not sure where he is right now, because he's in cyber operations on top of it,
Oh
so,
my goodness.
so I still don't know where he is.
Okay.
And it's hard. It's still hard,
I bet it is.
and I think that he is also going through a time of depression now. So, but, he's not mine.
Well, thank you. Noah, that was a good, the line you put in there was great, on a boat. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Isn't that just a definition of our faith? We are confident in what we don't really understand or know. As simple as that, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are aspects of our faith that we can know,
Sure.
right? Like the doctrines and so on. But when we use the word like walking out the life of faith, that's where a lot of the unknown enters in. Yeah, and that's what it means to be a believer. Yeah. Amen. Well, so she says, or he says, excuse me, who knows whether thou art come into the kingdom for such a time as this. And it seems like I can picture him sort of, hey, who knows if you, like, this kind of thing. Like it's starting to like make sense to him that she is exactly where she needs to be. And so he throws this out there, that she was placed where God wanted her for the time that he wanted her to be there to accomplish his purposes. And that principle is true not just for a queen or like important people, whatever. That's a true principle for every one of us in our walks with the Lord, that God puts us into circumstances and places to accomplish his purposes. It may not be to save a whole race of people or something grand like that, but it may be to influence people, or it may be to be a part of that planting and that reaping process and the harvest process of people's lives. Or it may be we're in this circumstance so we can be further trained up for this particular circumstance. And so I would encourage you to look at your life and look at the circumstances that you find yourself in as your for such a time as this moments, that God has you where he has you to accomplish his purposes in that. And then look for it. All right, Lord, why am I here in this particular circumstance? And allow God to minister to you and kind of lead you and direct you. Because I don't think that just applies to Queen Esther. I think it applies to all of us. So verse 15 says, then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai. All right, so he said, you got to do something. She said, I can't do something. What, are you crazy? And he says, for such a time as this. And so she comes back, and this poor guy, Hathach, running back and forth, whatever, make up your minds. And then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, that's the city they're living in there, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Look at that. What a strong decision. I mean, she made the decision. She's got to carry it through. That's the really, really hard part. But she determined, all right, I'm going to do it. And as we see there, she takes sort of that courage. She asks for the people to fast. You'll notice the word pray is not included here, but it's implied. We're going to fast and pray that I don't die here. And so she says, if I die, I die. What a bold attitude. She's got a mission here, and she was determined, no matter what the cost, I'll be obedient. And that is something exemplary, certainly. Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Again, that is, gather up everyone in the city, all the Jews, and have them pray and fast for 3 days. Now, back in 4:16, or you see there, she said, pray and fast for 3 days. So notice, on the third day, Esther put on her royal robes, is chapter 5, and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, in front of the king's quarters, while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room, opposite the entrance to the palace. Now, I have referred to this in my notes here as hurdle number 1. All right, for she made the decision, I'm going to do it. If I die, I die. I'm going to do it. And that's great. All right, she came forward at the youth retreat. She wrote her little pledge on the paper and she dropped it in. She nailed it to the cross. Do you see all these things that people do? She's determined, I'm going to do this. Okay, now hurdle number 1 is actually doing it. And so hurdle number 1 is putting on her royal robes there, and she's looking in the mirror. I don't know if they have mirrors, but she's, looking in the whatever. And okay, here we go. We're going to do this. All right. And so that was good. She's getting ready to do it. Then she walks down the hall and she has to turn that corner and she stomps and starts and stops. And she's decided, I'm doing it. All right. Hurdle number 1, verse 2. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight. This is a big verse. And he held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. That's what she was looking for. Remember? Then Esther approached, and she touched the tip of the scepter. I'm sure there's a process involved here, and that means something like she's welcomed. Yeah, okay, kissing the ring, like something like that. And the king said to her, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you, even to half of my kingdom. Now, if you just glance back over to chapter 4, verse 11, remember, she replied to Mordecai that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without him calling, she will be put to death, except the one to whom he extends the golden scepter. So this is hurdle number 2. All righty, so she took that step of obedience with a lot of courage, and now it's on him to reply, and he does. And he puts out the golden scepter, and she touches it, and so now she's crossed over that hurdle. Verse 4, and Esther said, if it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king. I have prepared, which means she had the meal. I'm sure she wasn't in there cutting onions, but she had the meal being prepared in confidence that things were going to work out as she was hoping God would work them out. And so she says, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared. Now again, Haman is the guy that is trying to kill all of her family, and so she wants him there. But why not just, she comes in, the king, his thing, she touches it and all that. Why not just say, all right, here's the deal. There's a guy here that's trying to kill me and all my people. Oh, yeah, it wouldn't be as exciting. Did somebody here? She's trying to butter him up. Food will do that. All right. It's his favorite meal, probably. Tell us about that.
You gotta grease one hand to get the other.
Okay, maybe.
But the time wasn't right either.
Did she know that?
I don't know.
I doubt it. Okay, so Mark, if you didn't hear, he said the time wasn't right. And we're going to see it wasn't right just yet. Here, yes, ma'am.
I think she wanted to get a feeling for the relationship that was going on.
With her husband or with Haman or them?
Yeah, she wanted to scope it out and see where it was.
Which one? I'm sorry.
She wanted to see how they were interacting with each other.
Haman and King Ahasuerus, or her and King Ahasuerus?
No, Haman and the king,
Okay.
so that she had a feel for what was happening.
Perhaps, yeah. I was wondering if she wanted to see how her and King Ahasuerus were doing. They hadn't seen each other in 30 days here. And I wonder, I think there's a lot of tact in this. So rather than just coming in and kind of, this is what I want you to do. I don't know if she sounded like that. You know, she's a smoker, you know, whatever. And so, you know, she kind of eases into it. I think she won Ahasuerus' heart. Remember, it wasn't like her good looks and all the fancy clothes she put on. It was kind of her character. We were looking at this a couple weeks ago, I think it was. And so she sort of wants to restore that relationship, perhaps. It doesn't tell us all of that, but she delays. We see that there. And what we do see, as Mark was pointing out, God is in this. Because the timing, we're getting close to the right time. We're crossing over some important hurdles, but we're not exactly at the right time yet. And so she says, I was hoping to have a lunch, dinner, a feast, and I want you and Haman to come. Now, that's not a crazy thing. This is like inviting President Trump and Vice President Van. These are number 1 and 2 in the kingdom. And I'd like you both to come to this meal. And so, okay, so Haman's going to come. Verse 5, then the king said, bring Haman quickly, he calls out to his servants, so that we may do as Esther has asked. So the king and Haman came to the feast that Esther had prepared. And as they were drinking wine after the feast, the king said to Esther, now what is your wish? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled. Well, here's the open door. If you're going to give me up to half of the kingdom, I'm only going to ask you to deal with one man, Haman, right? Well, when he says up to half my kingdom, he's not really offering her up to half his kingdom. It's like I'm willing to give you just about anything, you know, kind of thing. So he's not offering her up to half the kingdom. It's just an expression. Then Esther answered, my wish and my request. I feel like he's a genie. He said, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my wish and fulfill my request, insert, there's a bad law that was made and has to be, you know. No, she says, let the king and Haman come to the feast that I will prepare for them tomorrow. And tomorrow I will do as the king has said. I'll tell you what my request is. Okay. Does Esther chicken out? So he says, great meal. Whew, it was so good. And the drinks, thanks so much. Up to half my kingdom, what do you want? And does she chicken out with her answer by saying, let's have another feast tomorrow? What do you think? No. I got an emphatic no from somebody. No? Okay.
I think she just knows it's not, like she's just trying to wait on the Lord.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she's aware the timing's not right.
It's a chicken.
You don't think she was a chicken? Okay.
Put Haman off guard, so he wasn't ready for the thing that was about to come.
Why would he be more off guard tomorrow than he was today?
So like, he kind of invited to this special thing, now it's a regular thing, I used to came all the time.
Oh, okay. All right. Who else?
To
Yes.
his point, he goes home and is like, hey guys, guess what? She's got me back tomorrow. Like, so I
Okay,
think,
you read ahead. Very good.
sorry.
That's okay. No, we're allowed to read ahead. You know, I say never. Okay, so he goes home and he's feeling really great about himself. And did you say to Bill's point? Yeah, okay. Anybody else? Yes, Tom.
Well, I was thinking maybe, you know, like you said, she got over the first hurdle. She walked up and didn't know whether she was going to die or not, but she didn't. Now she's like taking a little breather, like, okay,
I mean, she's
I
got.
gotta build myself up again for.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Let me have, yes, ma'am, Nancy.
I'm thinking she's waiting for the 3-day fast to be over.
I thought that was over. That she waited the 3 days. Doesn't it say in like verse 1, on the third day?
Yeah.
So maybe it's in the middle of that day?
Maybe she's hungry and wants to eat.
Yeah,
days
that's
before
right.
she
I've been
does the big
fasting
scary
for 3 days. Okay, maybe that. Maybe. Have any of you prayed, let's use the example of, for an opportunity to share your faith? And then the opportunity comes. I'm so distraught. I don't know what I'm going to do. What's the meaning of life? And they ask you, and you chicken out and don't give them an answer. None of you have. Okay. All right. Go to the boardwalk mission trip, and it'll probably happen to you or whatever. And so that I'm not blaming her. I feel like Lexi was like, "How dare you assault the character of Esther," or whatever. I've done it where, you're like, all right, Lord, I'm going to do it. And then you get there and you're like, hey, you know what I mean? And you got no answer and stuff. So perhaps, I don't know. Remember the chess pieces of the Lord? So the timing is not perfect yet, not at all perfect here, as we will see. It's getting perfecter, as they say here. And she will bring up the concern eventually, but that's in chapter 7. And there's a world of difference between where we are now in 5 and where we'll be there. So the Lord knew what he was doing in silencing her, if that's what happened, or maybe she knew, or she was hungry and just wanted another good meal tomorrow. Verse 9, and Haman went out that day joyful and glad of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was filled with wrath against Mordecai. This guy, man, Mordecai, you're driving me nuts. Haman just can't enjoy life with Mordecai here on the earth with him. What's her name? Kathleen was referencing something we're going to read in a few moments here. But when he goes home, he is going to tell everybody he's going to say this, that I've been invited to a private feast with just the king and queen twice. I've been promoted above all the officials of the land. We know that he was one of the wealthiest men in the land, and he references that. He talks about his many sons and the honor of him having all these many sons. He is totally filled with himself. I am something else but that guy. And so he's got everything in the world in some ways, but one guy is able to rob him of his joy. And so he says, when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he neither rose nor trembled, he was filled with wrath against him. Despite all the things going for him, one thing could fill him with rage, and that was this fellow Mordecai. Verse 10, nevertheless, Haman restrained himself. Second time we saw that. And went home, and he sent and he brought his friends and his wife, Zeresh. That's her name, Zeresh. He restrains himself. Now, what we see is God is in this restraint, because he could have seized him or something like that. He could have done something like that. He's the second most powerful guy in the world here. And so God is also involved in this restraining. This is one more of those examples. Mark used the example of the puppet strings, kind of God's invisible hand. Again, God's never mentioned in the book. Prayer is never mentioned in the book. And you have God kind of moving things around like a puppet or the chessboard and all of that to accomplish his purposes. This is one more of those. Whatever Haman thought was motivating him, I'm not going to just stab Mordecai right now. It was God behind it. Verse 11, and Haman recounted to them, now he's with his friends, he's with his wife, and Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions which the king had honored him, and how he had advanced him above all the officials and the servants of the king. Then Haman said, even Queen Esther, let no one but me come with the king to the feast she prepared. And tomorrow also I am invited by her together with this king, with the king. Now, would you be rolling your eyes maybe if you're sitting at the, you're very important, like the wife's, oh, shut up, wash the dishes, or whatever here. This guy is really feeling good about himself, and he's letting everybody know that he does. But then we see in verse 13, yet all this is worth nothing to me, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. There's a vacancy in his hole, and you can see how important all those things were to him. This is who I am, because I have money, because I have sons, because I have promotions, because I'm the only one that goes to these meals and all that. I'm an important person. But this guy here, and if this guy can take away all of this or the meaning of all of this, then you got a problem. Haman has a problem, all right? And he's looking for his worth in the way other people see him, and 1,000 other people might see him as this, but if one guy doesn't, it kills him, and he wants to kill him. As we see. Verse 14, then his wife Zeresh. Now this is a sweet lady. Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows 50 cubits high. A cubit is 1.5 feet, 75 feet high. That's like a 7-story building. All right, so you go over to the biggest, I guess the DOT building is like 6 stories high around here. It's one of our biggest buildings here in town. That's pretty high. So you're going to put this gallows. Now the gallows, we use the term where we hang a person. And the robe comes off the top of it, whatever. That's not what's being referred to here. She's talking about, this lovely woman is talking about a big stick with a point on the end. So a tree, a telephone pole with a point on the end, and the person would be impaled on that pole. And the way they would be impaled on that pole is they would essentially sit on the point, and then their legs would be pulled down so that it goes up through their body and comes out their neck. And then they would be stuck up there for everyone to see. All right? And so this is this sweet woman's idea. You know what I mean? I see something like brutal man or whatever, but come on, lady. Haman. Yeah. Anyway, let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast. Oh gosh. This idea pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. All right, so they want to kill Mordecai, but they also want to publicly humiliate him. His body would be hanging from this pole 75 feet in the air for everyone to see and to know, and all of this stuff here. And it says the idea pleased Haman. Now, wow, you see here the power of hate. Just how much he hates this man, that he's willing to do this thing to him. Well, tomorrow Mordecai is going to die. By lunch, I'm sure Haman's going to get to work early. He's going to get on the king's schedule first thing in the morning, all right, what are we doing today? Well, we need to kill a guy. Okay, so by lunchtime, Mordecai might be dead. And so, Lord, if Mordecai's going to make it, you're going to have to act quickly. And he does. Isn't that fun? Yes. So chapter 6. Yes, ma'am. There's that decree, yeah. Yep. But that's going to be in 10 months now, 10 and a half months. So on that night, God has to work quickly. On that night, the king could not sleep. I couldn't sleep last night. I woke up at 2:30. So I'm afraid I may doze off before our study is over. What do you do when you can't sleep? What do? You read? I don't read because then you got to turn the light on. What do you do, Brian? A frying pan? You bop yourself? All right, let's talk here. A lot of us nowadays, we scroll probably, so I guess that's reading and things like that. Warm milk. I find a bowl of Cheerios helps me a lot, and then I fall back to sleep and stuff. So people use all kinds of methods, but a lot of people will read. This guy here, he's a king, so he has people read. And so it says he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds. That'd be a fun book to read. The Chronicles and they were read before the king. So these are sort of like the minutes of the kingdom. I don't know if you've ever read, this isn't like a novel. If you've ever read the minutes of something or just sort of like historical, it's like reading the encyclopedia, all right? Not very engaging or whatever. And so he gives orders to bring the book of the memorable deeds of this kingdom, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. That'll put him to sleep. Verse 2, and it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh. Remember, that's back in chapter 2, I think around verse 19 or so, 14 or so. How Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, who guarded the threshold, they were at the door or gate, and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And so we should all remember the story, is what the author is. We just talked about it 3 chapters ago. But if you've forgotten, it was Mordecai who was able to foil an assassination plot. He was there. People were talking about what they were going to do to the king. He overheard it. He got word to his niece, to the queen, to go tell the king, and they saved the life of King Ahasuerus. Now, you may remember at that point, we said nothing was done. There wasn't a plaque. There wasn't a ceremony, anything like that. And I brought up at that point, well, this is the thanks I get? I save people's lives and nobody does anything to help me or whatever. Well, I think God's hand was in it. So a few things here. It just so happens, remember I said God had to work quickly. It just so happens that on this particular evening, the evening before the morning where Mordecai is likely going to have a death sentence named against him, it just so happens that the king is unable to sleep that night. And then it just so happens that he decides his method to get back to sleep, he's going to have people read to him. And it just so happens he says to them, bring me the most boring book you can find, the Chronicles of the Kingdom. And I'm sure there were 20 volumes or 50 volumes of the Chronicles of the Kingdom. And it just so happens they picked this volume. And it just so happens they open it up. And the story that they read about is this story of this fella, Mordecai here. It just so happens, it just so happens, it just so happens. At some point, things aren't just so happening. At some point, somebody is involved with pulling the strings and moving the chess pieces here. And again, we talk about that God is nowhere mentioned in this book. And I told you, the first time I learned that, I was like, really? His name is never mentioned in the book? What are you talking about? I just read the book or whatever. And you go back and you're like, you're right, it's not. But he's all over the book. G. Campbell Morgan referred to it as the unseen God. That, his name's not there, but he's all over it here. And so verse 3, Mordecai, it says, Bigthana and the other fellow there, they were going to kill him. And the king said, what honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? And the king's young men flipped through the pages and back and over again. And he says, well, king, it doesn't look like anything. We didn't honor him at all. And the king is like, that's ridiculous. I can't believe it. And again, I have to imagine back then Mordecai is thinking, this is the thanks I get? Like, did I say that with a Jewish accent? I didn't mean to. But this is now I'm going to try and I'm way off. All right. But God was in it because the timing was, because imagine if the king says right now, and how did we honor the guy that saved my life? And it says, the guy says, well, king, don't you remember? We had like a little thing in the rose garden and it was cool and a lot of people came and we took pictures and it was really nice. Oh, good. Then the king would say, good. I'm glad we honored that guy. I appreciate him. And that's it. But the man comes back to him and he says, we didn't do anything for him. And what we see here is that God had a plan in delaying kind of the reward to his timing, because God's going to use that here for this exact moment. And so, verse 4, and the king says, so what do we do for the guy? Nothing. It just so happens someone shows up, Haman. Verse 4, and the king said, who's in the court? Now Haman had just entered the court. Now, it feels to me like it's very early in the morning, maybe dark. That's why who's in the court, because he couldn't see. It feels like Haman is like, I can't wait to get to work tomorrow. I'm going to be there before the sun is up and we're going to get this Mordecai killed. So he says, now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's young men told him, remember the question was who's in the court? The king's young men told him, Haman is there, standing in the court. And the king said, let him in. Verse 6, so Haman came in, and the king said to him, what should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? Now, remember how he went home and he told his family, I'm rich and I got sons and I had a meal with the queen and they brought me back again tomorrow and so on. And so obviously, who's this speaking about? Well, in Haman's mind, it's him. And so he's like, all right, what would I like here? Reese's Pieces candy, bring a lot of it, or whatever. So what would I like? And so Haman said to himself, whom would the king delight to honor more than me? Who thinks that way? Yeah, proudful people. Prideful. Continuing. And Haman said to the king, for the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown is set. Now, if I'm the king, I'm growing a little concerned. Like, excuse me, Haman, like, who do you think you are? Do you think you're going to be the king? You think you're the... So I don't know if I like this, but it shows you where Haman's heart is. Bring the royal robes, bring the royal crown, bring the royal horse and all that. And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. And again, Haman thinks he is the one that's going to be honored, and he certainly has no idea that he means his archenemy will be honored in this way. Otherwise, he would have said something, the king should honor him by putting him on a big stick. That's what he should do. That's what he would have said if he knew it was Mordecai. But again, God is sovereignly working, and he's moving those chess pieces around. We can't look at this book and think, oh my gosh, how lucky it was here that he couldn't sleep that night. And how lucky that the guy picked the right book. It's not luck at all. It's the Lord is sovereignly at work in these circumstances. And they're terrible circumstances that the Jews are finding themselves in, and God is there, and God is at work here, orchestrating these events, working them out to accomplish his purposes. Now, I will say that, the verse, all things work together for good to those that love God, right? We know that verse. It's a very important verse. We love to depend on that verse. Sometimes we quote that verse after things have worked out. It's hard to hear before they have worked out. And so, and it's hard to believe before they have worked out. The verse, did we put it up there? And it says, and we know for those who love God, all things work together for good to those who are called according to his purpose. And so it becomes a challenge when we're in the midst of a difficult situation. And look, there are Christians that are killed for the faith. And you might look at it and you're like, well, it didn't work out for them. In heaven, they're okay. All right, we know that here. But here on the earth, everything doesn't work out swimmingly and wonderfully and perfectly, and man, it's just so great. And in the end, Christians are going to win and all these kind of stuff. It doesn't work that way. But what does work is we know that God is sovereignly in control of all of those circumstances and will use them to accomplish his eternal purposes, that when we get to heaven, we'll say, yes, I get it, I understand it, I like it even. But down here, Lord, I don't know where we're going here, and I don't know if I like this here. And so the verse says all things work together for good. It refers to the culmination. There may be steps along the way that are very difficult here. It's important for us now to have our eyes on God is working out an eternal purpose. God is working out an eternal purpose. All right, and so we see that here, what God is doing, even in all of the chaos of they're going to kill all of us here. So be careful not to take one event in isolation and that define God. So I got fired from my job. God's horrible. I'll never love him again. I'll never trust him again because he wouldn't have let me get fired. No, you can trust him. All right, let it play out, and so on. So verse 10, then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so for yourself, Haman. Now he says, and do so to Mordecai the Jew. Now, this must have just shocked him. He said, who sits at the king's gate, leave out nothing that you have mentioned. And Haman must have just fallen over. Like, I can't believe this. Yeah. So Haman took the robes, he had to, and he dressed Mordecai, and he led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to, and I'm sure it wasn't with a lot of passion, thus shall it be done to the man and the king delights to honor. And he probably said it 100 times and all of that here. This must have just killed him. Now, I'm intrigued by verse 12. So you have just been marched around the city. All right, you're on a horse or whatever it was, I forget, a carriage or something. The guy is marching you around the city. You're wearing a crown. You got the royal robe on, his royal horse and all this kind of stuff. They're saying, the king delights to honor this man. You've just been honored by thousands of people. And then I look at verse 12, and it says, then Mordecai returned to the king's gate. And so it doesn't say, then Mordecai used his newfound fame and went out and did this, or went out and did that, or began ordering people around, or whatever. I'm an important person now, and everything changes. He goes right back to doing what he had always been doing. And he goes to the king's gate, and whatever his job as a servant at that gate was, he goes right back to that. I admire him for this. It says, then Mordecai, he returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house mourning and with his head covered. And Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. These are the same friends that were saying yesterday, kill him, or whatever. And now they're like, ooh, man, you're screwed. You're on your own. What do you think about that, Sam? Did you have a question?
Yeah, my question was, earlier they were saying, hang on the gallows. Now they're saying, you're not going to overcome them.
Yeah.
What changed? I mean, they told what happened.
Yeah. They're not the most reliable friends, I guess, here. Like, hey, you're on your own on this one, buddy. Yeah. All right, so what an interesting statement they make. They're kind of prophesying. Now, these aren't Jewish people. They're not Christians. They're not believers here. And yet, they're pretty insightful as to where things are going here. Maybe they've heard the history of the Jews and how God has always preserved the Jews or whatever. But they said, look, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, yeah, you're in trouble, buddy, there. And Haman's probably like, thanks a lot. How about a pick-me-up? How about, tell him, hey, don't worry, buddy, today was a bad day, but tomorrow will be a better. They don't give him that. But Haman he doesn't have a long time to wallow in his sorrow here, because as we see in verse 14, the limo pulled up. It says, while they were yet talking, the king's eunuchs arrived, and they hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. Remember, king, come back. Can we come back tomorrow and do this again? And he was all excited about that. He probably forgot all about it as he was marching around the city with Mordecai. But he's got to come back. He's got to go to this lunch. And I hope you'll come back next week to find out how that works out. And Kathleen, read ahead. All right, I know you will. So we will see what happens here. And look at us, folks. 3 chapters. I don't think we've ever done that before. So that is an accomplishment. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your unseen hand in our lives, Lord. And I remember reading today, someone talked about how looking back over our lives, we can see very clearly where you were working and how you were working and orchestrating events and so on. But that's not so easy to do when we're in the midst of it and we're moving ahead into our lives. And so we thank you for that and that encouragement. We thank you for this book and the reminder and the encouragement for us to trust you in every circumstance. Lord, even when things really seem difficult. So thank you for Mordecai, his faith, his example. Thank you for Esther, her courage, her faith, her example. Make us more like them, we ask. In your name, amen. All right. Thank you, everybody.